Hello and welcome to the Nexus, our final show of the year, and what a year it has been. The coronavirus pandemic has overshadowed pretty much every story in the world, even the US presidential election. But during the course of the year, we have managed to find some time to cover other stories, and we have spoken to some of the very interesting characters who are in those stories, including President Trump's former communications director, Anthony Scaramucci, the former boss of the disgraced financier, Jeffrey Epstein, and the so-called architect of Brexit, Mr Nigel Farage. So let's start with Anthony Scaramucci, the White House communications director, who was fired by Trump after a mere 11 days on the job back in 2017. We're going to get to the interview in just a moment, but first, a quick look at the mooch in action.
Breaking news from the president. President Trump officially picks Anthony Scaramucci, and he's going to be the communications director at the White House.
The mooch!
The mooch.
The mooch! Hey!
Anthony Scaramucci is going to be a very different and unconventional comms director in a very unconventional White House.
I love the president, and I'm very, very loyal to the president. And I love the mission that the president has. I think he's got some of the best political instincts in the world and perhaps in history. I think we've got to just radio signal the direction very, very clearly. If you want to eat an elephant, you got to eat it one bite at a time. Thank you.
Anthony Scaramucci communicates the way the president does. He uses big gestures, simple language, and brings a business perspective to how Washington should work.
One of the things I cannot stand about this town is the backstabbing that goes on here, okay? Where I grew up, in the neighborhood I'm from, we're front stabbers. We'd like to tell you exactly where we're from and what we're doing.
This morning, a White House at war with itself. New communications director Anthony Scaramucci unleashing a profane attack against Chief of Staff Reince Priebus.
And Reince is a paranoid schizophrenic, paranoiac. What he's going to do is, maybe Bill Shine's coming. Let me leak the thing and see if I can block these people the way I blocked Scaramucci for 6 months.
He says almost homophobic things about Steve Bannon. I mean, these things are appalling, and I can't imagine that that is constructive at all in working towards the fulfillment of President Trump's agenda.
And what do you think the president does about it?
Well, he's got something big to deal with.
News from the White House. ABC News has learned that Anthony Scaramucci, the White House communications director who just started 10 days ago, is now leaving. Perhaps the writing was on the wall after that tirade.
Wait, what? Scaramucci out, but he just got here.
You don't survive long, especially in this White House, when you are the focus of more attention than the president.
10 days on the job. That makes Anthony Scaramucci the shortest tenured communications director in the history of the White House.
I made a mistake. I'm accountable for the mistake. I paid the consequences of that mistake. And, I was honorably dismissed, and I took it.
Okay, then, let's hear from the man himself, Anthony Scaramucci. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us here on the Nexus. Really appreciate it.
It's good to be here. You gypped me out of 1 day, though. I was there for 11 days. I mean, that's like 9.1% of my federal career. So
that was going to be my opening question. That was going to be my opening question.
Even the president, when he's tweeting at me, acknowledges that it was 11. But that's
He does say 11 days. Others say 10. I don't get it. How do you count it from the 21st to the 31st? Anyway, let's put that to one side. Look, when somebody lasts 10 or 11 days in a job, usually everyone forgets all about them, but not the mooch, right? Everyone remembers you, even around the world. Why do you think that is?
Listen, I don't think it was intentional. I think it was a pretty spectacular blow up, but I think it was important for me is that I didn't lose my voice in the debate. You know, when I got fired about a week later, the president called me and he asked me how I was doing. I said, hey, relax. You just made me as famous as Melania and Ivanka, and I didn't have to sleep with you or be your daughter. So I was totally fine with it. And so when Stephen Colbert called me for the late night comedian, I accepted his invitation. And you may remember this if you see my interviews on the internet. I was supporting the president for 2 years after my firing. I was trying to be a loyal Republican, which is why I have a big understanding for these people who are still loyal to the president. I just think they're making a mistake at this point, given the activity of the president.
Okay. Well, I don't think it was just your firing that made you so memorable. It was also because you were an outsider. You were a Wall Street guy in Washington. You described yourself as someone who doesn't go around stabbing people in the back like the politicians. You were a front stabber, which is an expression I'd never heard of until you said it. But now you're...
Shouldn't people be that way, though?
They should be. I just didn't know there was an expression for it. But now you're siding with a man who's been in politics for 47 years, the ultimate Washington insider. What's changed? Have you changed?
I have changed. No, there's no question about that. It's interesting. Somebody said to me, well, you're disavowing President Trump. He's the same guy that he was in 2015. What's changed? Me. I've changed. I think I'm more psychologically minded. I'm more empathetic. I think the experience that I went through over the last 3 years has made me realize that you don't want to overly equivocate your principles, your moral values. And I think that your patriotism is frankly more important than partisanship. So yes, I have changed. And by the way, you mentioned the 47 years. The country did pretty amazing over the last 47 years. You know, we helped to bring down the Berlin Wall. We helped to create the advent of the communications age and all these great internet companies. We've done pretty well. I mean, are there pockets of things that we need to improve in our country? Yes. But this nonsense of saying that he's been in government for 47 years, like he didn't do anything, you know, the country's done pretty well.
Well, let's pick up on that, okay? So a few days ago, Trump tweets, in 47 years, Joe did none of the things of which he now speaks. He will never change, just words. You responded, it's an amazing country to live in and be a part of those last 47 years, except when you started ruining everything. Now, I have to ask you, Anthony, are you serious? It was an amazing country for everyone for those 47 years?
Now, listen, you know, I think my tweet, we're sort of microanalyzing it. Was it an amazing country? By and large, for most everyone, yes. Do we have racial tension in our country? Do we have an income gap in our country? We do. But let's go back 47 years ago. My father was a blue-collar worker, not college educated, high school graduate, 42 years operating a crane here on Long Island in suburbia, and he lived a middle-class lifestyle. There were wages in the United States for labor that allowed people like me to live the arc of the American dream. And so did everybody experience that? Okay. No. I think one of the tragedies that's gone on is there's been some policies and some outsourcing that have hurt that. But by and large, it's been a very successful country, arguably one of the most successful in world history.
All right. Now, you're saying, except in your latter part of your tweet, except when you started ruining everything, okay? Now, to say that America's troubles on this magnitude began with President Trump seems rather strange. I mean, the 47-year period you're referring to goes back to when Nixon was in charge. And, you know, let me give you a quick summary of what's happened between 72 and now. You had Nixon removed from office. You had a Vietnam War raging, Rodney King riots in 92. You had what some people call an illegal war in Iraq, the Battle of Mogadishu, where hundreds of Somalis may have been killed. I mean, there's always been trouble in the United States, Anthony.
Well, I think there's been trouble, you know, in the world, frankly. I mean, it's not just the United States. I mean, listen, on a relative basis, when you look at the United States and you look at the American experiment over the 47 years or the 244 years, it has presented a land of opportunity for most people, certainly for my family and for many families. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. If you want to read a book that discusses the stuff that you're discussing, just read These Truths by Jill Lepore. The professor points out a lot of the inconsistencies, a lot of the hypocrisy of our government, the original stain of slavery, the lack of Reconstruction after the Civil War, and voter suppression. Sure, I can list for you a lot of the things that are wrong with this country.
So then why pretend it all started? So then why pretend all the problems in America started with President Trump? Is it because you have personal? No, Anthony. Is it because you hate him? You hate the president.
I absolutely do not hate the president. I actually used to like hanging out. This is not a personal thing for me.
But you've called him mad. You've called him racist. You said he stinks.
You're doing something very interesting now because you're a good interviewer. And I got the angle that you're going in, but what you're doing is you're overreading into the tweet.
Now, the mooch was predicting, indeed campaigning for a Joe Biden victory, whereas our next guest, Nigel Farage, was betting £10,000, or around $13,000, on President Donald Trump. Ouch. Well, Mr Farage is now predicting a 2024 comeback for President Donald Trump, and we're going to hear the interview in just a moment. But first, for those of you who are unfamiliar with his work, here's a quick introduction to Mr Brexit.
A friend of mine, a lot of people say one of the most powerful men in Europe, Nigel Farage.
4 years ago, I was honoured to come to America to bring the Brexit message, the message that you can beat the establishment.
We love Europe. We just hate the European Union.
He's very genuine, and he tells it as it is.
He comes across as a sort of everyday sort of person.
This crusade, for me, has been a quarter of a century.
We want our passports back.
This is how the Nazi Party started in Germany in the 1920s.
You're a fraud, Nigel. You did nothing to help these people.
We will get our independence back, and we will get our borders back.
The UK has voted to leave the European Union.
Independence Day!
The political class are doing their utmost to stop the greatest democratic exercise in the history of this nation, and I'm absolutely furious about it. We voted to leave, full stop.
So here we are, middle of the English Channel. We're right on the edge of British and French territorial waters. Already there have been 3 migrant boats spotted. The French Navy now are actually escorting boats into British waters. We're being humiliated.
Nigel Farage will relaunch his Brexit party as an anti-lockdown party called Reform UK.
I'm not telling you there isn't a problem with this virus, but the price we're paying is crazy.
Businesses who've struggled already, I think this is just a major blow for them.
The cure is indeed worse than the disease.
What the Prime Minister's trying to do is save our lives.
I've been astonished since the start of this, the extent to which we've allowed our basic liberties and freedom to be taken away by a government who are frankly behaving like totalitarians.
I want to be free. I want to live my life.
Okay, let's talk to the man himself now, Nigel Farage. Welcome to the
Thank
Nexus. You said you wanted your life back, but you haven't spent 5 minutes of the last 4 years out of the public eye.
No, it was a complete failure. I thought, I'd campaigned for 25 years to get a referendum. When this subject wasn't even on the radar of UK media or UK politics. We'd got there, we'd won. I didn't feel there was much more I could do. And yet within a couple of months of saying that, I found myself plunged into the American election, supporting Donald Trump, being attacked by Hillary Clinton. And yes, since
You say
then,
you found yourself, but this was a deliberate choice by yourself. I mean, you don't just sort of find yourself swept up in events, do you?
It was all a complete accident.
Really?
It was. I went to Cleveland for the Republican convention, and ever since I was a kid, I've seen, the first one I saw was Reagan, I think, speaking, and the balloons come down on a ticker tape. I thought, wow, that looks like fun. So I literally went along for a social couple of days, and one thing led to another, and I found myself on the stage with Donald Trump in 2016.
Well, let's start with Donald Trump then.
Yeah.
Your friend, the president, is still refusing to concede that he lost the election. Do you think that he should now concede?
He will concede as soon as every legal avenue has been pursued. Rather like Al Gore 20 years ago. He wasn't happy with what had happened in Florida.
Right.
So Gore continued those cases. I mean, look.
Well, the basis for Trump to do this is that he believes there was massive, widespread fraud, and that could affect the outcome of the election. His Attorney General, Bill Barr, the Justice Department and the FBI, he says, have found no evidence of widespread voter fraud which would affect the outcome of the election.
Yeah, I saw
So I
that.
ask you again, don't you think it is time to concede, not because he's acting unconstitutionally, but because many people say he is now dragging the reputation of the country down with him?
I wouldn't say that, no. As I say, legal challenges with American elections are not as uncommon as perhaps we think right now. What I will say to you is this. I have been the most outspoken critic of postal voting on demand in this country over the last 20 years. Every single time you get widespread mail-in ballots, you get fraud, you get intimidation, you get problems on a huge scale. It does not work. It's why the French don't allow it to happen. They've got a very good system. Now, I said from day one that I had no doubt there'd been ballot harvesting on a gigantic scale. How does that work? It's very simple.
Right, no, we
it's very simple.
Yes,
very simple. The postman puts the ballot through the door, and 5 minutes later, someone knocks on the door and comes to collect it. But I said from the start, and I know this because I fought a court case last year over a UK by-election. I'm still convinced I was right, but I lost.
But when his attorney...
And I can't see Trump proving this. So anybody...
you can't see him proving it.
No, I can't.
No, absolutely.
No,
which would... You'd think that he would therefore cut his... Have you spoken to him about it? Have you advised him at all about it, how you would handle it?
Look, what he has succeeded in doing is waking up a lot of Americans to the fact that something very odd happened because they gained seats in the House of Representatives. They've held on.
The Republicans.
The Republicans. They've held on to the Senate. They outperformed Hillary Clinton in many, many wide parts, in many, many counties all over America, and yet in the big Democrat-held cities, it looks like there was a 90% plus vote, and nearly all of it went in Biden's favor.
So, well, this is all very well and good, but the important thing here in the legal challenge, the important thing, is he? He's asked the question. He's had somewhat 30 lawsuits around the country, and they have all been either dismissed or withdrawn, with only one small exception where he got a win on procedural basis. But again, the Supreme Court will not look at it unless it is important enough to change the outcome of the election. You appear to know and acknowledge that it is not going to change the outcome of the election. No. Therefore, what is the point of hanging on? What is the point?
There's a very important long-term point to make sure that America never does this again. That it never does it again.
So it's a sort of a warning that there will be a price to pay.
It's actually a cry for reform. Because if you look at the polling figures, huge numbers of Americans don't say there was widespread fraud and that's why Trump didn't win. But what they do say is they've got serious doubts about the way that certain states conduct elections. So if the long term of this is that America cleans up its act, in terms of elections, he would have achieved something.
Okay. Now, while the US election and Brexit grabbed whatever headline space was left over from the pandemic, the rather grisly and nasty Jeffrey Epstein scandal continued to unfurl in New York. Jeffrey Epstein, you'll remember, was a so-called billionaire sex offender who killed himself while awaiting trial for allegedly abusing underage girls. That was in August 2019. In 2020, nearly exactly a year to the day, his alleged partner in crime and former girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, was arrested. She's awaiting trial in a different prison in New York. Now, shortly after her arrest, we spoke to Jeffrey Epstein's former boss back in the 1980s, a guy called Stephen Hoffenberg. Mr. Hoffenberg gave us a very interesting insight into his former protege. Well, we'll hear from him in a moment. But first, a quick reminder of the sheer size of Jeffrey Epstein's fortune and the mystery surrounding how he made it.
Accused sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein is dead.
Prison officials found Jeffrey Epstein in his cell. Apparently, he had hanged himself.
As questions swirl around his death, attention is shifting now to his estate. Where are the assets?
We know about the properties he has. He's got an island to himself in the U.S. Virgin Islands. In Manhattan, he has a home on the Upper East Side. He has one in Palm Beach, Florida, a ranch in New Mexico, as well as a home in Paris.
Court papers say his estate is valued at more than $577 million, including more than $56 million in cash.
How on earth did Epstein make all of his money?
So all that we really know about Jeffrey Epstein is that he started as an options trader at Bear Stearns, and then he became the money manager for people including Les Wexler, who owns the parent company Victoria's Secret.
Somehow he agreed to hire Jeffrey Epstein to manage all of his finances.
You know, when you talk about Jeffrey Epstein, there's so much we don't know, particularly about his finances.
We know that he was a paid consultant at the very least for a firm called Towers Financial. They were a New York City financial firm. And the company participated in what was at the time the largest Ponzi scheme in American history. Stephen Hoffenberg, the CEO, says Epstein was the brains behind the operation. He set up the whole Ponzi scheme.
All his money comes from crimes.
Shockingly, he signed a will just 2 days before he killed himself in a New York jail. Epstein put all of his holdings in a trust.
His alleged victims are now vowing to go after those assets, saying they should be distributed. Since Epstein's death now means there will be no trial on criminal charges.
Stephen Hoffenberg, you actually think that Epstein's even more vast than they say it is, and that they're hiding much more money. What makes you think that?
Well, it's more than hiding. There's no certified audit by an accounting established firm that showed us how they came up with the cash. They're saying there's $634 million in various bank accounts now with no CPA, financial statement, nothing to certify this. So there's no question that they liquidated assets to get the $634 million amount. But I know for a fact there's substantially more assets around the world. And there is money laundering, which is the claim being made against this estate. And the estate is being run by one of Jeffrey Epstein's co-defendants, Darren Indyke, which is outrageous for anybody to accept.
So what would you estimate his fortune to be at then, if not near $500 million or near $600 million? What would you put it at?
I would put it far above $1 billion right now, and it could be much greater because we're talking about over 20 years of monetary buildup. And I know some of the transactions he participated in, they're much greater than what's been reported. There's no evidence, there's no supporting financial statements, there's no certified audit, there's nothing.
Now, your claims have been widely publicized in national newspapers around the world, but one of the lawyers for the executives of the estate have dismissed your claims, saying after spending 18 years behind bars for being a fraudster, Hoffenberg is not a reliable source and his story is completely false. What would you say to that?
The claim that you just repeated was an error because the article was confusing that he was citing. I did not say at any time that the estate had over $100 billion in value. What I was discussing, which was in the last chapter of the article that he was quoting, was that the revenue, the amount of turnover of the money over 20 years was above $100 billion.
Let's pick that up now with Frank Worrell. He's tracked down money for the FBI over many years. Mr. Hoffenberg and Jeffrey Epstein, according to Mr. Hoffenberg, were putting together a Ponzi scheme. And when that collapsed and it was revealed, only Mr. Hoffenberg was in the frame and went to jail for some 18 years. Nobody went after Epstein. Why didn't the FBI, and you were in the Bureau at the time, go after him?
I would say it's pretty unusual that only one person would come out indicted in a case so large. In fact, there's usually an appetite to go after as much as you can and for as much money as you can, and even the assets of the participants in the scheme. Not sure why. So yes, the FBI had a chance in the SEC to go, a bite of the apple. Then they had a second bite of the apple later with Epstein. Now they're going for a third bite. But let me give you some reasons to be confident that they're going to consume the apple. The head of the FBI is in New York is Assistant Director William Sweeney. I know Bill Sweeney. Sweeney is incorruptible. He's a great investigator on his own. I worked with him in Newark for many years. I'm actually personal friends with both him and his family. He'll get to the bottom of this, and the media is all over, and they've already uncovered a lot. But if you look carefully at the progress of the two different indictments, really it's one investigation, it looks like they're going after forfeiture. It's prominent, it's named, and there's substitute assets. So they're going to be quite a bit taken into the criminal investigation.
Mr. Hoffenberg, we've just heard a former FBI agent there talking about the possible seizure.
Frank.
Yes, exactly. What is your reaction to that?
That's incredible breaking news by Frank, the former FBI agent, explaining to the audience that there's going to be a forfeiture in the New York Southern District of New York federal courts proceeding by the FBI, who I know are doing a great job, and they have the skill set to do the forensic audit to seize the assets.
Now, just one more note on that story. Ghislaine Maxwell is due to go on trial in a few months' time, around about mid-July, and there should be some very interesting revelations if it gets that far, and we'll be here to cover the story for you. Well, that is it for this week. From everyone who works on the Nexus to all our viewers online, on their phones and at home, have a great new year. Till next week then, goodbye.